Okay, so here we go. Let's see if this can see if this will work a little better. I think I might have my sound problems. Uh, this the idea of this stream is to tease out some of the differences between the idea of being conservative and the idea of being right wing. Um, there's, I think it's useful to think about underlying structures to the things that we perceive, with the structures being like Taylor's dummies, and the things we perceive, the historical conditions, being like the clothes that go on those dummies. What we see and what we react to, the circumstances and conditions we experience, that's just part of the reality. There are structures underlying these things which we would do well to understand. And one way of getting at these structures is through old books, particularly those by thoughtful people, because through these we can compare the clothing of another era with that of our own and see maybe some outlines of the shapes which are underlying them. So, one example of this is the issue of conservatism and being right wing. So, in the modern context, particularly the American context, but really across the West, these are two concepts that are conflated. But the conflation of these two is a historical phenomenon. It's part of the tailor's clothes. The very concept of being left or right wing originates in the French Revolution, as most people probably know. But the Wikipedia article on this is kind of instructive because the article describes this origin twice. If you take a look at that, I'll just read from it. From the Wikipedia article, it says the terms left and right first appeared during the French Revolution of 1789. Okay. When members of the National Assembly divided into supporters of the Ancien Regime to the president's right and supporters of the revolution to his left. One deputy, the Baron de Gauville, explained, "We began to recognize each other. Those who were loyal to religion and the king took up positions to the right of the chair so as to avoid the shouts, oaths, and indecencies that enjoyed free reign in the opposing camp." All right, so there is our first description, and then it cites a person of the time who seems to have been on the right side, explaining why they were on the right side. They just joined up there because they didn't want to be associated with the savages on the left. But then the Wikipedia article gives us a second version. And this it goes on to say various legislative assemblies divided themselves during the revolution, where members with quote authoritarian, anti-democratic, or anti-socialist views sat to the right of the chamber, and those with quote liberal, democratic, or egalitarian views sat on the left. Um, so this version of things essentially, I don't think it's putting, I don't think it's putting too much interpretation on it to say this definition is essentially telling us the bad guys sat on the right and the good guys sat on the left. And if you look at the origin of this version of the origin of things, it comes from an encyclopedia, Edmund Wright Ed, 2006, the Desk Encyclopedia of World History. An encyclopedia has this very unbiased view of what the origin of left and right is. So obviously, there's something going on politically in terms of what's going on there. But the same article also points out that right from the very start in France and then elsewhere, these terms left and right became synonymous and became conflated with ideas of conservative and liberal. The way it's put in France from the start was the left wing became associated with movement, change, and revolution. That's what that party was about. And the right wing became associated with order, i.e., conservative, not changing. Okay. And so you can see the survival of that conflation down to today, where the Republican Party is the right wing, is the conservative party. And and they don't want to change. They're stuck in the past, as they say. And then the left wing party, the Democrat Party, the Progressive Party, is for change. Well, one way of looking at this is that what this should tell us, especially the fact that it's an encyclopedia puts it as I described earlier, is that really what our regime is and has been to some degree since 1789 is a regime of permanent revolution, where it's a movement forward, progress, a movement towards justice, equality, and so on. But what if the opposition to that movement is not conservatism? What if the proper opposition to that is not um, merely a position of resisting movement, of upholding order? What if conservatism actually is not a proper response? And to get a look at that, I'm going to take a at that idea. I'm going to take a look at Thomas More's Utopia, because I think this book contains a very lovely description of what conservatism is, absent the left-right distinction. What the fundamental conservative temperament is all about, I think, can be found in this book. If you're not familiar with Utopia, this is a book that was first published in 1516, written in Latin, and it appears in two parts. There's two parts to the book. The second part is the part that most people know. It's the part that is the description of the famous island of Utopia, where its political and social institutions are founded on the absence of private property. People live under a kind of communism that existed in the early Christian community, which you can find described in the book of Acts, but with the very important difference that the utopians are not Christians. But that's the second part of the book. What interests me occurs in the first part, where Thomas More himself appears as a character, along with his real life friend, Peter Gillis, who's Belgian. They are in Antwerp. He's there on political affairs for King Henry VIII. And then, as part of the first part, there's a drama where they run into a man that Gillis knows as a traveler, a world traveler named Raphael Hifliday. And Raphael is going to tell the story. The part two is all his narration of what the island of Utopia is all about. But in part one, they talk to him, and he's described as like a Greek philosopher and very learned. Um, and at one point, Gillis remarks, "Wow, you seem to be very knowledgeable. You should put yourself to the service of a prince. You should give political advice, basically." And Hithliday is not interested in that. He shows no interest. And then he raises the point of, well, who would listen to me? Like, if I were to give advice to princes, what princes are concerned about is, like, enhancing their wealth or enhancing the size of their kingdoms. Giving wise advice is not something that someone would listen to. There's no way to be effective. Philosophy can't be politically effective. And then Moore himself enters into the debate, and then he makes a very interesting point about this. So right after Hithliday says, if I were to step up and say that the king shouldn't be thinking about how he can extract more wealth out of all his subjects, if I were to come up and say that, wouldn't everybody be very deaf to all of that? And quoting from the book, "No doubt very deaf," answered I, "and no wonder, for one is never to offer propositions or advice that we are certain will not be entertained. Discourses so much out of the road could not avail anything, nor have any effect on men whose minds were prepossessed with different sentiments. This philosophical way of speculation is not unpleasant among friends in a free conversation, but there is no room for it in the courts of princes, where great affairs are carried on by authority." "That is what I was saying," replied Raphael. "There is no room for philosophy in the courts of princes." "Yes, there is," said I, but not for this speculative philosophy that makes everything to be alike fitting at all times. But there is another philosophy that is more pliable, that knows its proper scene, accommodates itself to it, and teaches a man with propriety and decency to act that part which has fallen to his share. If when one of Plautus's comedies is upon the stage, and a company of servants are acting their parts, you should come out in the garb of a philosopher and repeat out of Octavia a discourse of Seneca's to Nero. Would it not be better for you to say nothing than by mixing things of such different natures to make an impertinent tragicomedy? For you spoil and corrupt the play that is in hand when you mix with it things of an opposite nature, even though they are much better. Therefore, go through with the play that is acting the best you can, and do not confound it because another that is pleasanter comes into your thoughts. It is even so in a commonwealth and in the councils of princes. If ill opinions cannot be quite rooted out, and you cannot cure some received vice according to your wishes, you must not therefore abandon the commonwealth for the same reasons as you should not forsake the ship in a storm because you cannot command the winds. You are not obliged to assault people with discourses that are out of their road when you see that their received notions must prevent your making an impression upon them. You ought rather to cast about and to manage things with all the dexterity in your power, so that if you are not able to make them go well, they may be as little ill as possible. Now, this, I submit, is a wonderful picture, and it has nothing to do with left wing or right wing, because it's all, quote, right wing at this point. It's all about advising princes. There is no democracy in Moore's time. But this is conservatism. This, I submit, is the essence of the conservative mindset. It is an acceptance that political affairs are affairs of fallen men. They're not perfect, and you can't make them perfect. And his reference to a tragedy of Seneca, where there's a discourse to Nero, this is a famous episode because Seneca was a philosopher and he was a teacher of Nero. And, under Nero, he had to kill himself. I believe he was enforced by the emperor to kill himself. It ended badly. His philosophical discourses had very limited effect on Nero, particularly as Nero got older and more aware of his power and less interested in any checks on his power. So there's a lesson hidden in what Moore is in Moore's reference there. But this idea of making things as little bad as possible. Maybe you'll try to improve things by incremental improvements, or if you can't do that, you'll resist bad things happening. That is the conservative mindset, okay? Well, I'll do the best I can in this fallen situation. And it's perfectly wise advice. It's perfectly good advice in many, many situations. I would even say probably in most situations. But the issue that the leftist revolutionaries raise, and that revolutionaries in general raise, is, well, what do you do in that situation where not only can you not make things better, but you can't even reduce the ills? What's the proper approach then? Just to abandon things as they are, or to do something else? Now, a few weeks ago, I tried to do a stream on an interview between Eric Weinstein and Chris Williamson. And my point with doing this stream was that I thought it was a fine picture of this same conservative mindset in a modern context, and in fact, in a left wing context. I'm not going to go to the video at this point, but what I will do is just reference a particular passage from this interview. So, in the interview, Weinstein makes the point that most of the wealthy, the very wealthy billionaires, in his view, have, quote, given up on the retail notion of reality. What's that? That is that whatever it is that the mainstream media, NPR, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New Yorker, whatever ideas inform those outlets, or whatever minds can be informed by those outlets, whatever mentality it is that allows you to accept these outlets as providing some kind of view of the truth, the wealthy have decided, or they have checked out of this mentality to such a level that it is, to Eric, astounding. He says that they don't believe that they can afford to depend on these sources anymore. So, and instead, they want to engage in a kind of apocalyptic thinking. They believe that some kind of crash is necessarily coming, and they just want to survive it. Things are going to have to collapse, and so they're hoarding their resources in anticipation of this. And he says that's a shame, because these are the people whose resources could shore up the system. Shore up the system is a quote. That is, again, because it's propping up a left-wing permanent revolutionary system. That's our system. He wants that to be preserved. This is a left-wing conservatism, right? We should preserve this. We should keep doing this. Even though, as he admits, most of those outlets aren't really providing us much of a picture of the truth anymore. So the approach of these wealthy people, as he describes it, is the approach of Raphael Hythloday in Utopia, which is, no one's listening to me. There's no point in it. I'm going to withdraw to my own world, basically. And what Eric Weinstein wants them to do is try to shore up the system, which is the advice that Moore, as a character, is giving to Hythloday. Well, no, you should still try to do the best you can, adapt yourself to the play in hand, be aware that it's a play, aware that it's a comedy of errors, but try to make things as little ill as possible. But one thing that's interesting about Utopia is that even though Moore puts that conservative defense in the mouth of a character with his own name, that's not necessarily his view, because he also gives Hythloday quite a lot to say afterwards that suggests that Moore is aware of the limitations, I would say, of conservatism. And those limitations are precisely that one can reach a point where there's nothing really left to conserve. And to illustrate this, I'll make another quote, one last quote here, which comes from Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols. There's a little aphorism in there, number 43, whispered to the conservatives. So here is another picture of a non-conservative, but also a non-left-wing view. So here's what he says. What was not known formerly, what is known or might be known today, a reversion, a return in any sense or degree is simply not possible. We physiologists know that. Yet all priests and moralists have believed the opposite. They wanted to take mankind back, to screw it back to a former measure of virtue. Morality was always a bed of Procrustes. Even the politicians have aped the preachers of virtue at this point. Today, too, there are still parties whose dream it is that all things might walk backwards like crabs. But no one is free to be a crab. Nothing avails. One must go forward, step by step, further into decadence. That is my definition of modern progress. One can check this development and thus dam up degeneration, gather it and make it more vehement and sudden. One can do no more. So that's kind of an accelerationist mindset, if you will, right? You know, the best you can do as a conservative is prevent further decadence. Or you can just go full hog into decadence. His view of moving forward is a view of progressing out of this commitment to equality. In other words, progressing forward into a right wing or a right future rather than a left future, a democratic or one. Now, the title of the stream is "We Are Not Conservatives." The idea is that there is a growing awareness among many that the regime as it exists can't really be fixed because it's sort of set on a path. And incremental improvements aren't going to work because it was by incremental improvements that the current regime got itself to where it is. In other words, it was by a long march through the institutions, uh, not necessarily by communists, but certainly by the left, took place. They're very well aware of incremental improvements. They have all of their institutions set up to ensure that the one-way ratchet only goes one way. It only goes left. So there can't be an incremental improvement away from that kind of insanity. It's just not possible. Um, and making things as little bad as possible, well, that is possible, but what that is what Nietzsche describes. It's really just damming up degeneration. It's checking degeneration. But the degeneration is still going to happen. Ultimately, it's still going to happen because there's only one way to go forward. And if people realize this, I think that there's going to be an increasingly well, there's two mindsets that can rise. One mindset is the turtle mindset, the mindset that Weinstein describes of the wealthy. Well, I'm going to try to last through this as best I can. But the other mindset would be a revolutionary mindset, a mindset which says this regime doesn't work and it has to go. It's not appropriate. That is the, if you will, the Alexander Dugin mindset, the fourth political theory, because that is what he means by that. A fourth political theory is a theory of the future that arises out of the awareness that the three political theories that tried to handle modernism or modernity prior to now have all failed. Those three political theories being, in order of appearance, liberalism, communism, and fascism. Those three have failed, and another theory is necessary. So I hope that's been of some interest and benefit. I appreciate anyone who might come across this stream later and watch it. I don't think anybody's watching it live. And I'll see you next time.